I've discovered with trees is nothing is permanent, so no matter how hard you try. And somebody once suggested that I talk about HOAs in the context of this, and I don't want to get into HOAs. So I've made the assumption that you're good to go in putting these antennas up. So on another day, we can talk HOAs. So the advantages of trees is often, not always, but often they're readily available, they're tall, and they're typically pretty strong. But the big disadvantage of trees, as I'll show a couple of times here, is that they're alive. They're really dynamic and they're changing all the time. And that just means that you have to keep up with them all the time. You just have to constantly engage in maintenance. This is an example of where something got away from me. I put a little thing around the tree, you know, like one of these little flagpole ties, and I let it go for about a year, and I came back, and this is what I found. I had a heck of a time getting the rope out of that because the rope was all tangled up in that. So the point is that trees are always growing, always changing, and when you use a tree as an antenna pole, you just got to keep an eye on everything all the time. The other thing is that this really bugs me, but this is what happens is can you turn out this light here, Brendan? Somebody just, there's a light right on the screen, and is that all right? Yeah. Okay. So earlier this year, I had a guy out to trim my trees, and then today, you can see where he trimmed the trees right here. Look at what this tree is doing. It's sending out another sucker. So they shoot out all these suckers all over the place, and they're a constant pain, and you know, they just get in the way. Again, the point is that trees are constantly changing. So that's where it was cut off, you know, earlier in the spring, and it's darned if the tree isn't giving it to me and growing another one. You can see these other little branches where I had some cleanup work done here. So again, the point is they're constantly changing. You have to keep up with them. The other disadvantage is that they move in the wind, and so you have to take precautions because if the trees blow in the opposite direction, of course, they're going to stretch out a dipole or whatever wire you have. So you have to figure out a way to accommodate that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then sadly, trees come down in storms, and I remember the first tree I ever put an antenna in way back in, you know, like 1982. I had a wire in it. I was living in an apartment. I had a wire in a tree, and I came back from spring break in Michigan, ice storm, and the tree was flat on the ground. So it completely ruined my radio experience for a while. But anyway, these are all things that can happen. So, but if it's all you got, they're really useful to use. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've done to get away with it, so to speak. A word or two about safety. Climbing a tree is every bit as dangerous as climbing a tower. So the higher you go, the harder you hit, and the more damage that can be done. Height kills, and what's really important to remember is you could be standing on a branch and it can break. And if you don't have some type of protection, you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. So if you're going to take on climbing trees, you know, do it right. Get some training, use good equipment, and work with buddies, and be sure you protect them as well. And then I like my feet firmly on the ground, so I hire guys who are used to doing this to help me, so hire a specialist. So that's my personal recommendation for myself anyway. I thought this was a really fascinating picture, but what's the point of this picture right here? If you're going to use a tree, what do you got to watch out for? Yeah, arborists maybe, falling out of the tree when you're working. But, you know, obviously power lines are a real issue, a real safety issue for trees. And I saw some pictures, but they were such terrible resolution I decided not to use them. But sometimes power lines can be hidden in trees, so you have to really be careful when you're doing it. And in particular, if you, like, for example, go to a field day site or an area that you're not familiar with, there have been people who have been killed by shooting a wire over a tree, and they didn't realize there were power lines in the tree. So it's really important to watch it. And well, this is an example here. Fortunately, let me just make this a tad smaller. Yeah, I think I'm just off the side. I can use the telescope here and make it a little smaller. So the title here is 2 hurt near Gordon Lake. We're taking down antenna electrocuted. So, you know, this kind of, well, you know, it's the media, so give them a little latitude. But they were at least hurt. I don't think they were killed. But, you know, there are examples of people who were killed. There, you know, and as you know, I've been active in the Scouts, and a few years back at one of the national jamborees, there were some people killed when they were putting up a tent pole, and it got tangled up in an electric line. So anyway, it's just something you have to watch out for, and if you take proper precautions, you'll be okay. Okay, so attaching to a tree, there's a couple ways to do it. One is from the ground, and the other's from the air, and there's a couple of ways to do it in each way. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about ground methods, and then ultimately at the end some from the air methods, and then I'll talk with you a little bit about my specific implementation. So starting off with from the ground, the first example to talk about is throw weights. And a throw weight, got the picture here. They're really common. If you want to get one of these throw weights, they have them at the Virginia Outdoor Equipment Supply place over on Lee Highway. They sell a lot of arborist gear, and you can get these things. And this is Bill Mims, and Bill uses this to loft his portable antennas, and he's going to show us how he launches this up into trees. Okay, thank you very much. And I'll come to it in just a minute. There's another way to get those big guys up in the trees as well, but before we get there, if you don't have one of these, you remember the knot tying class I did a little while ago. I didn't talk about the monkey fist, but you can tie up a monkey fist and put a rock in it, and it'll basically behave the same way. It's a way to keep a rock captured. Say again? Yeah. So if you don't use something like a monkey fist, I've had a situation like he was talking about the David and Goliath thing, and I fling it, but the rock goes backwards and ends up, somewhere where I don't want it. So a knot like the monkey fist helps keep the rock going where you want it to go. Okay. So slingshots. So there are a number of different slingshots that are available for this. Thank goodness Bill was here, because my easy hang that I intended to bring this evening is proudly sitting on the floor of my garage at the moment. But Bill had one in his car, fortunately, and so this is an easy hang here. And what you do is you can put it like this, and there's lead weights that come with it. The lead weights, just get put in the slingshot, push the button, and it's a way of putting a smaller weight up in a tree. Pretty effective. Doesn't go terribly high, but works pretty well. One of the big problems that I've found with this is that, to the point Bill made just a second ago, sometimes the weight doesn't get all the way down, so you have to shake it, and it's pretty good, but it's tough. And then the other thing is if you pull it up over a branch, and if you don't tug it just right, it just spins round and round and round, and you leave your weight in the tree, and you have to do it all over again. So it works. The best thing to do is to get the weight on the ground, unhook the weight, and tie your string on it, and then gently pull a heavier string across, and then pull your rope back the other way. So works pretty well in portable situations.
Don't do what I did, which is this. You see why?
Yeah.
You aim it like this, so if anything lets go, the worst thing that happens is you get hit in the chest.
Yeah, it's wearing safety glasses. I should probably put that
Not
on.
the safety part, but wearing safety glasses with something like this is a really great idea. Okay, and then here's the big bang bang right here. This is called a super shot. And the way I found out about this when I had an arborist over, the first arborist I had over to climb my trees and so forth, used one of these, and he used it with this right here, and you drop that in there like that, and then just pull it back, and this thing has a lot of power. And again, like Bill said, you really have to be careful if these things if they snap back on you, it can be a problem. But anyway, just pull it back, and off it goes, and it'll heave these weights up pretty high in a tree. The arborist that I had got one of these things up 40 or 50 feet over a branch so that he could get up and climb in my trees. So I got one because I thought it would be useful for field day and so forth, and I've used that quite a lot, actually. Yes?
Well, like I said,
So a guy who knows what he's doing, like this arborist, tossed one of these weights about 40 feet in the air, I would say. Yeah, really, really, it's pretty powerful. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so the other thing is pneumatic guns. So this is one of my pneumatic weapons here. It has, for those of you who haven't seen these before, it has a chamber that you pump compressed air into. I put a valve on mine so I could see how much pressure was inside. And then this is just a mechanical valve. And again, sitting in my garage at home is the thing that I use in here. But basically, it's a smaller diameter piece of pipe with 2 end caps on it. And it attaches to the fishing rod here. And I just drop it down inside, pump up the pressure in it, and then aim it where I want it to go, and then just twist the valve, and poof, it goes out. And depending on how much pressure you put in here and how big the weight is and so forth, you can launch a projectile pretty high with one of these. There's all kinds of designs for these things, and one of our club members actually wrote an article in QST a number of years ago about this. It was, remind me, yeah, it was Byron Black, yeah, so Byron Black wrote the article in QST. And here, let me, did we? Yeah, it was before my time. So
I was standing by.
You don't want to call it
I have
gun.
a friend who's a cop, and he says, I didn't see that, I didn't see that.
I would have gone to prison at field day last year.
so the next one.
so you really don't want to use unless you let the police know. But anyway, online, so there's Byron's article in QST. So if you search on Byron Blocks, can you remind me his call sign? W4SSY if you're interested. Byron's articles there. It's really interesting. He covers all the different design aspects and so forth. And I don't know, maybe that's a project we want to take on again sometime.
You to call them pneumatic launchers. Just a matter of
Yes, that's fair.
Okay. Now here's another thing. I was reading an article. I have never used one of these, but this is called the DT Systems Super Pro Dummy Launcher with Dummy. Now, this thing, it's available on Amazon if you're interested. I put the link there just so you can go look at it. But this fires with a .22 caliber charge. So you put the .22 caliber charge in it, and it's originally designed for use with hunting dogs. So what you do is you launch this thing, and it sounds like a gun, and it's meant to sound like a gun because they want the dog to get used to the sound of the bang, and then this thing goes out, and it's meant to have the dog retreat. But if you put a rope on it, it works really well to launch this projectile up over a tree, apparently. Yeah. So I'm not recommending this, but I saw it in an article about getting stuff over trees, and I just thought it was interesting, and that I would share it with the group. So.
And in fact, sometimes the open carry weekend or whatever coincides with field day. And so you'll see the guys walking around with pistols on their hips.
So, but anyway, in Falls Church,
Where I live, I would never use one of these unless I let the police know about it. But
In construction, that uses almost the same concept of a brass blank round to fire nails into concrete.
yeah, it's a similar concept. Yeah.
okay. All right. So guns or projectile launchers, whatever it is we want to call them. So those are examples, and there's a lot of different examples of those kinds of things. All right, so those are examples of things from the ground. The thing about that I wanted to emphasize about on the ground, typically what you're doing is you're launching a rope over a tree, and the thing you have to watch with it, in my experience, is that if it's sometimes doesn't work really well for long-term installations, because if a rope is over a tree, or particularly if a rope gets caught in the crotch of branches where the branches come together, if you don't go out and wiggle those lines every once in a while to make sure that they're free, the tree will go around it and you're stuck. And so you really have to watch it. So anything you launch over a tree, it works. Typically more temporary because the trees are rocking back and forth and either wearing on the ropes or the tree is growing around your rope. Of course, you can't see what's happening from the ground, so you just got to keep an eye on it constantly.
The rope you throw over, you hang fully on the end of it.
I'm going to get to that in just a minute.
Okay, all right, so that's another example. So you can use what I'm about to talk about in this situation as well, okay? So from the air, quadcopters, I'm not going to spend very much time talking about that because Don talked about his quadcopters a couple weeks ago, and I know that he's come around to some of the folks here, and I'm going to leave that to his area of expertise, but I wanted to mention it because it is a way to get something up over a tree and place it a little bit more precisely than I can shoot with one of these weapons that I was talking about just a second ago. Okay. So then, could I have the lights out again, please, just again so we can see some of the. I think off, please, would be great. Yeah, just turn them off. Everybody's well behaved here. So the other thing that you can do, and this has been my choice because I found it's not terribly expensive, and there's a lot of guys around who will do this sort of stuff, is to get some people in to just put some pulleys or hooks up in trees in specific locations where you want. And what I tell my wife is that we need to maintain the trees and keep the yard nice. And she says, okay, well, why don't you go ahead and do it? And then I say, oh, by the way, let's put some ropes up in my trees. So so that works pretty well. Actually, she's pretty supportive of this stuff. But, you know, it's kind of a twofer. You know, you can clean up the trees in your yard and put up some antenna ropes at the same time. So these are photos of tree guys who've been in our yard. When we first moved into our house, we had to have this great big huge poplar tree removed. And that's what this was here, and that's where I first got the idea of having the arborist put some stuff up in my trees. So this is a guy climbing a tree in my backyard, and this is one of the rings that he's installed. So just in general, in installation, when you put things in trees, if you're going to have something more permanent, you can use screw eyes, threaded devices, and so forth. Always best to use stainless steel hardware, just like you would like to use in antennas, because if you don't use stainless steel, again, you come back and before long it's completely rusted out. So it's really worth spending a few extra bucks on the stainless steel hardware. And then again, back to my point about trees constantly changing. When you put these things in, leave some room for them because the tree will grow around them. And you just want to leave yourself some wiggle room for maintenance and so forth. So these were some examples that I pulled out of the ARRL antenna guide. So they talk about using trees here. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that it's good to put some type of strain relief, because when the trees blow around in the wind, what you want to do is you want to have the strain being taken up on the ground here with either, in this case they show an elastic tie down, and some people use like milk containers filled with sand or something that's mounted on a pulley, just so that when the trees blow, the excess strain is taken by the weight that's moving up and down on a pulley instead of pulling your dipole apart, which is something that can easily happen. So, yeah, John?
Two PVC pipes, one filled with sand and the other one around it, so that it could float up and down the constant tension on your antenna.
Yeah, there's a number of ways.
Number of devices that you can use for this stuff. So,
if you put an eye in, keep that in mind, and periodically, if you can, turn it out a couple of times every few years.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And
I've had situations where I've had screw eyes in trees, and I've tried to do that, and you know, it got fairly far along, and they actually broke off whenever I was trying to take them out. So again, it's really important to keep up with these things. All right. So those are some of the general comments. So now what I want to do is just spend a few minutes talking about what I've done at my place. And I've used the arborist, like I talk about, to put these things up. And I find that this is constantly a work in progress, because I try something and I find things that work and I find things that don't. So I'm just going to share with you what I'm doing right now, and if anybody has any comments or any suggestions, I'm open for it. So this is just something, this is the kind of thing that's worked the best for me. So what I've started using now are these little gadgets here. I just found them. I was searching online for something that I could put a pulley in, and I came across these at U.S. Cargo Control. It's a trucking company, and they sell all kinds of hardware for truckers. And these things are things that truckers screw into the side of their truck, and they use them to tie ropes on their trucks. And they work really great up in my trees. And this is a photograph of the arborist who was in my trees about 3 months ago. they came around to do some tree work, and I asked them to put these rings up. And so here you can, I just took a picture with the telephoto lens on my camera. And this is a corner tree, and this is one of the things that I learned is that when I first did this the first time, like 6 or 7 years ago, I only put one ring in the corner, and the next thing you know, I want to use the corner for an antenna going this way and an antenna going for that way. And so I'm trying to tie 2 antennas to the same pulley, and it was a real tangle of ropes and a mess. So when I had them come around the next time, a piece of advice that I would have is in a corner, have them put one so that you can put the antenna in one direction and the other antenna across the corner. So when they were here last time, I had them screw these rings. So this is the same ring that I used last time. And and this is the picture, the photograph over on this side is a picture of this guy up in the tree. Do you see where he is? Can anybody see him? So there he is right there. So this is a zoom in of this guy up in my tree. So he's up in the tree about 80 feet. So he's way up there. And I see Bill fidgeting. So do I need to hurry here? I got 5 minutes. Oh, see the guy. Okay, do you see him? He's right there. Yeah. So he's way up there. So if you got tall trees, you can really get a dipole way up there. So and that's what I've been able to do. So the other thing I've discovered recently is this rope made by this company called Mostrand. It's a Dutch outfit, and their ropes are sold by DX Engineering and Gigaparts, and it's a rope that's specifically made for antenna guys. They sell all kinds of rope that is designed for that. It's UV resistant. It doesn't stretch. And so I decided to try it, and so far it seems to be working pretty well. And one of the things I like about it is they also sell this hardware that allows you to make connections between ropes without tying knots, which helps keep the rope really strong. And this hardware is all stainless steel, pretty easy to use. Costs a few dollars for these things, but I'm trying to put these antennas up to stay for a while, so I've invested a little bit of extra in them. So I use the Mostrand rope. These little kits, these little ring kits look like this whenever you get them, and then this is just a photograph of one that I made with the rope that I used. And then coming back to Kirk's comment, this is the way I set it up. So if you remember those rings up in the tree, what I do is I take, when the tree climber goes in, I ask him to put the rope up through the ring just one time. What he wanted to do was wrap it around a couple times. I said, no, don't do that. And just put it around once and then bring it back down. And then I attach a pulley here. And what the attachment that I use looks like this in the next picture. So this is the rope coming down from one side, and it comes down into that little Mostrand connector loop thing, all tied off here. And then I put a little stainless steel ring here that's threaded so it doesn't pull apart. And then this is the other side of the loop, and then I put a pulley in this right here. And so the configuration again looks like this. So I put then the rope that holds the dipole while it's still on the ground, and then the next step is to raise that up in the air so that the pulley is hanging from the loop, but it's separate from the antenna itself is separate from the loop through the ring. So any thoughts on why I've decided to do that? If I drop the rope, that's one. Yeah, but the other thing is my dipoles break, and the last thing I want is to have the rope come out of the ring when the dipole breaks. So this for me is just like a little bit of extra insurance to protect against the antenna breaking, and also it gives me a lot of flexibility in bringing the antenna down and adjusting it and that sort of thing. But the main reason for doing this is that antennas break, and if you have the antenna through the ring and it breaks, then you're done. You have to have the arborist come back and put the rope back up in the tree.
Sure.
It's not directly related to this slide, but as you said, with stainless fasteners, if you're going to use stainless nuts and bolts for anything, put anti-seize on the threads if you ever want to take it apart again. Because stainless steel, once you break the outer oxide coating, it will cold weld to itself. So if you ever use a stainless fastener, put anti-seize on the threads, or else you'll never take it apart.
All right. Okay.
And then I know this is going to be really hard to see, but I thought I would throw this up here anyway. So this is an actual photograph I took from the ground. So this right here, this rope right here, is equivalent to the blue rope right here. So you see it coming up. It's coming through the ring, and then this is the connectors here, and there's the pulley, and then the other piece of rope is coming down here, and then the line that's attached to the dipole is coming up through the pulley and out this way. So it's kind of hard to see, but anyway, that's what it looks like when it's pulled right up to the top of the tree. And then the whole thing looks like this, because I do the same thing on the other side. So I have 2 loops, I have 2 pulley setups, and I pull the dipole up from both sides. So that's, again, that's what I'm using right now in my yard. And then the other thing I mentioned earlier is build in some sort of flexibility. You know, if you have your dipole really tight and those old trees go in the opposite direction, your dipole is history. So you have to build in something. What I tend to do is just leave a lot of the dipole's up so high, I just let it have enough slack so that there's enough room. And I've had pretty good luck with them staying up. I've mentioned it many, many times. Maintenance, you got to constantly keep an eye on things. When I pulled some ropes down, I just noticed, for example, there's some wear and tear on the rope. So you just have to keep an eye on the ropes that you have, because they do wear out with the trees moving around all the time. And the other piece of maintenance is these bloody suckers that grow out of the trunks of the trees. They always get in my way, and so you can see the tree climber there with his chainsaw, and he's up there with one arm sawing these things off. It's pretty amazing. But that's one of my big problems with the trees. And I already mentioned that you know, there they are, and they're relentless, growing out of where I just cut one off. So anyway, okay, so that's the story about how I get my dipoles up, how I do my best to keep them up. I'll never climb a tree because the arborists are not that expensive. I found that, you know, they'll depending on how much time we had them do a lot of tree work this year, so. We paid a little bit more than I intended, but the first time around I paid the guy like $300 or $400 to go up and do it, and I thought that was really good value for you know, you think about the money I got tied up in my antennas and radio gear. Having guys climb trees like this is not a lot of money proportionally, and it really helps to get a dipole up there. So, any questions about what I've talked about at all?
Okay, all right, great. Well, I'll be done.
For then. You had requested that I talk a little bit about attenuation of radio signals by trees, and so it turns out that there was an article published in the February 2018 QST. It was a cover article, "The Truth About Trees and Antenna Gain," and so I had a quick read of the paper today, actually, to look at it. And Bob Boas, is Bob here? Bob also circulated. I don't see him, but Bob also circulated a paper. Where some people did some simulation work to look at the effects of trees on RF attenuation. And it turns out that, and this references the QST article, is that living trees, like living people, will absorb RF energy primarily for vertically polarized antennas. So if you have a vertical antenna that's sitting next to a tree trunk, the tree trunk will have an effect on the radiation from that antenna. And what the article says, and they did this through simulations, what they found with their simulations is, you know, no big surprise, the bigger the diameter and the taller the tree, the more attenuation you get. There's less attenuation as you increase the distance from the tree. Again, no big surprise. It also turns out that there's a Yagi-like effect if you place a vertical antenna about 2/10 of a wavelength from the tree. So it turns out that the tree will act as a reflector, and it will help direct the signal in the direction in the line between the antenna and the vertical. I was thinking about, and I resisted the temptation to put all the graphs in here, and so for the purposes of brevity, I decided not to include them, but I would refer you to the article if you want to see how much that attenuation is and what the frequency relationship is and so forth, because they modeled some of that stuff and reported on it in the article.
Mean that the reflection coefficient is high, or what do you mean by strong Yagi? Like, does that mean that the reflection is significant?
It's like 3 or 4 dB difference.
That it's significant, if I remember the numbers right. Yeah. So,
Get an 80-meter vertical yagi.
then just to say again,
Then it's not vertical, I mean, it's got gain, it's not omni.
No, well,
it's vertically oriented, but it's the pattern is not omni. That's correct. That's correct. The other thing they reported is that a single vertical tree doesn't have any effect on horizontal antennas. You know, no big surprise. And then the other thing they discussed in the paper was solid forest. So for those of you who are out in the woods trying to use your HF radios, it turns out that the solid forest will attenuate more than the single tree. And that Bob's paper, the paper that Bob sent, really was getting into the research on that, and the people are trying to figure out exactly what the mechanism is. But the leaves, basically, as well as the branches on a canopy of trees, has the effect of attenuating a radio signal, and it decreases the output of both vertical and horizontal antennas. So if you're in the woods, it doesn't work as well. And again, I don't think that's probably any big surprise. There's less attenuation in the winter when there's no leaves. And so the recommendation is find clearings to improve signal, and of course find the balance. You know, if you're in the woods, find the clearest spot you can and balance that against the need for putting something up in a tree. So that's all there is. You use them, even if it is in the woods. So, all right. So that's my little overview on my trials and travails with using trees as antenna masts, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
But hold your questions and do them during lunch break. Grab him during lunch break, because we have a bunch of things we need to talk about.
Outstanding.
Thank you,
I
Leon.
have to answer questions.
Yeah, I saved the information.